Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. According to a recent CBS News New York Times poll, the view of race relations in this country is not good. 57% of Americans now say race relations are bad, and only 37% say they are good. And there doesn't seem to be much appetite for improvement. Only 1 in 10 Americans say improving race relations is the single most important issue of the future. Could it be because the majority of blacks and whites in this country are uncomfortable talking to one another about race? Are you uncomfortable? We have a plan that might make it easier. Another View is next, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. So, as you know, on Another View, we discussed today's issues from an African-American perspective. Now, sometimes we get a lot of flack for that. Listeners have told us that we are divisive, that we do more harm than good because we talk about race and racial issues. But the vast majority of listeners who I meet with when I'm out in the community tell me that this show allows them to hear a perspective that they otherwise would not hear, and that it has led to greater understanding. And that has always been the goal of Another View, to have another view of the African American community with the hope of leading to greater unity. America is at a racial crossroads, and now more than ever, we need to talk to one another, not yell at each other, but really talk to one another. So Another View has partnered with Virginia Wesleyan's Center for the Study of Religious Freedom and the Fort Monroe Authority on an initiative called Race, Let's Talk About It. We're going to tell you all about it on today's show. Please welcome Kelly Jackson, Associate Director for the Center for the Study of Religious Freedom. Hi, Kelly. How
Hi,
are
Barbara.
you?
It's great to be here.
Michelle Woods-Jones, Executive Director with the Hampton Unity Commission. Hi, Michelle.
Hi there.
Eric LaVille, Assistant Professor and Director of the Hampton University Pre-Law Institute. How you doing, Eric?
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Good to be here.
And joining us by phone is Jonathan Zur, Executive Director of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Hi there. Good to chat with you today.
Thank you. And Glenn Oder, Executive Director of the Fort Monroe Authority. Hi, Glenn. So happy to have you with us also by phone.
Glad to be here, Barbara.
So I'm going to explain the relationship. So I'm going to start with you, Kelly. Why is the Center for the Study of Religious Freedom joining with us to do this initiative?
Well, what the center really tries to do is bring people of diverse perspectives together to help inform them about issues and also to transform, to change hearts and minds, and to understand why religious freedom is a basic human right of daily significance. We try to promote the values of mutual understanding, respect, and reconciliation, and these are values that are important to race relations as well. So we look at this as an opportunity to really promote the core values of what we're doing.
And Glenn, why the Fort Monroe Authority?
We are excited to partner with WHR on this issue because, first off, it's of local and regional and, of course, national importance. And we think that the property at Old Point Comfort, which we often refer to now as Fort Monroe, plays an important part in the history of America. It's incredible to think that in 1619, of which we're actually coming up on the 400-year anniversary of that time, the first Africans that were delivered to our country departed here and arrived at Point Comfort, which is now Fort Monroe. It's also amazing to think that 240-odd years later, at the outbreak of the Civil War, the first 3 people that were not returned as slaves or as property were at Fortress Monroe. And eventually, then, once the decision was made to declare these escaped slaves contraband of war, and the word spread through the slave community, over 10,000 slaves sought their emancipation on the land that was protected under the guns of Fort Monroe. It's an incredible march of freedom that took place at this property. We ask ourselves the question at Fort Monroe, if we could make this story the one that it is of national and international importance, how could that help our country? Where else can the story be told? Where else would it be more appropriate to tell the story? And so the idea of partnering with WHRO and hosting this conversation at Fort Monroe, we think is part of our responsibility at Fort Monroe, and we're excited about it.
Fantastic, and we really appreciate that opportunity. So let me let the listeners know how this is going to work. We're going to be conducting 4 conversations between now now and June of next year, where we will start the conversation here on our air during our regular Another View show. And then we will continue the conversation in the community during a town hall session. So there will be 4 town hall meetings, 4 shows that will correlate with that conversation. We felt it was very, very important that we have discussion that leads from just talking to true understanding. And we've put together a stellar panel of experts who work in the field of racial justice and racial understanding. And so the people that you meet on our show today, Michelle Woods-Jones, Eric Clavel, Jonathan Zur, and who was unable to be with us today, Dr. Mabel Velasco from Virginia Wesleyan, those 4 individuals will be at each of our town hall meetings. And they will help us in guiding our discussions so that when things come up or if people get stuck in the conversation, then they are there to help us to interpret what's making us stuck. Michelle, I want to start with you then to talk about what are some of the things that make it uncomfortable for people to talk about race. Just before you say that, there was a CBS News poll that I referenced in the beginning of the show where they were just saying that that is one of the biggest issues that people have about talking about race. They feel that it is a very, very tough thing for people to do.
Certainly it is. When you think about the history of race in America, it is not a love story. It is not an easy story. It's a painful story. It's a painful story from the perspective of having lived it through your ancestors, whether you were the slave or the slave owner. There aren't very many people who want to say, I was a slave owner and I feel so good about beating the hell out of them. These are very difficult topics and they're multidimensional. Often when we talk about race, we talk about it without the understanding that we experience it through a wide variety of different lenses, based upon our experiences, based upon the kinds of information that we have had, our opportunities to interface with a wide or small variety of different kinds of people, and our own sense of wherewithal about race. Mm-hmm. And few people are just bigoted because they want to be bitter. The majority of the time it's out of ignorance, lack of information, or to a large extent, it is simply a result of not having good experiences that would allow them to be more multicultural in the way in which they behave and relate to other people.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, do you notice that, because I know you deal with a lot of young people, do you notice if there is a difference in the conversation between African Americans and whites versus other races when there is a discussion about race?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that's happened over the last few years, particularly in Virginia, has been that we've had to broaden our conversation about race. So at the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, when we have high school programs and we've had conversations on race in the past, it has primarily been a black and white conversation. And in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, we've had a growth in the Asian population, the Latino population, in terms of students, high school and middle school in particular, attending our program. And while their experiences, if I'm Latino or I'm Asian, can be in some ways comparable to the experiences of folks who are black or African American, there are also a lot of differences, a lot of nuances in terms of the treatment that folks have, the history that Michelle introduced into the conversation. And so we are starting to see among young people a broader conversation. That doesn't mean the issues have changed or gone away. It just means we have to expand how we understand a conversation on race and race relations.
Mm-hmm. But is the rhetoric the same? What I'm trying to get to, and Michelle, you can jump in on this also, sometimes from the African American perspective, and I'll speak from what I have heard some people in the African American community say, they feel that there is sometimes an encroachment, I guess, if you will, that if you bring in another group of people, if you say like the Hispanics may experience something this way or Asians experience something this way, that it's almost like you're minimizing what black people have felt about an issue because it's not the same. Does that make sense, Michelle? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, very much makes sense because it isn't the same. Pain is pain, no matter who experiences it. That certainly is the same. But the root of the pain and how it manifests itself and how one integrates the process of that is very different. And I think that one of the reasons there is a reluctance to be hospitable about this conversation when talking about it from a variety of different perspectives, especially with baby boomers and some Xers, is that the story that they need to tell has not been heard. And they are faced with an onslaught of denials about their experience. And so it's almost as though, wait, let me tell my story. Let me be heard. Let what I have experienced be acknowledged. And then it's your turn. So I think it's a lot of unfinished business and therefore fear that my story will really not be understood in the way I need it to be understood, because you'll go off now and worry about the Native Americans or about our gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender population, and you will forget that my story has not been acknowledged.